All right. Welcome to Researching Happy, the podcast focused on all things mental well-being research. And if you've been following along, I've been saying since episode 1 that I want to cast a really wide net on different perspectives of happiness. And so far, that's just what we've done. We've had guests from a range of academic disciplines: anthropology, public policy, positive psychology, clin psych, epidemiology, education, philosophy, theology, medicine, economics, neuroscience, and a few more. But tonight we're taking a big step out of the research world to another place that I love, which is the world of comedy. So please welcome Paul Ollinger, a writer, a stand-up comedian, and host of the Reasonably Happy podcast. Not Researching Happy, Reasonably Happy. He was I just cannot wait to get into this, one of Facebook's first 250 employees, where he served as VP of sales for the Western United States. Paul swapped that world for the world of comedy and has just released a new book that shares the name of his podcast, Reasonably Happy: Essays on Money, Work, and Other Things That Piss Me Off. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew. I'm delighted to be speaking with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. So tell us briefly, I'll just jump straight into it. So basically, I just need to know, how does a guy go from a Facebook executive to a stand-up comedian? I love it.
Well, it was actually from stand-up comedian to Facebook employee, salesperson. I got promoted a couple of times to manage the West Coast sales team. West Coast in the United States would mean Seattle to San Diego, where companies headquartered would include Nike, Visa, Starbucks, the movie studios, the North American headquarters for some of the Asian auto manufacturers like Kia, Hyundai, Toyota, etc. And what happened was I went to business school when I was, 25 to get my MBA, and because I wanted to make more money. And one night I had been asked to host a talent show for my fellow students, and I just made fun of my friends for 10 minutes. And I didn't think about it as stand-up comedy. I just was like, okay, I'm going to roast these guys. I'm going to make fun of the people that I care the most about, because that's how men who can't
That's
contain
love,
their
yeah.
emotions, that's how we demonstrate love. And so I did it, and it just was an overwhelming success. And I felt this narcotic wave of acceptance and reinforcement that is laughter and applause. And you go, oh, what is this? And so that's the night I was bit by the comedy bug. That was in 1996, I believe. And I had borrowed a significant amount of money to pay, like, what would be $160,000 in today's money to get my master's. And so while I thought in that moment, oh, this is what I was meant to do, I still had obligations to go back and pay my debt off.
Yeah.
Which is a very old school way to think about debt. Yeah, that you actually should pay it off. And so I went to work in the digital media industry in 1997 upon graduating from business school. And it was the coolest thing I could think to do. It was and I was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but this seems like a cool industry. And I happened to pick a great place, a brand new industry that was going to explode over the next several years. I worked for a company called launch.com. It was a music website. We went public and then crashed like everybody else in 2000. And then Yahoo, remember Yahoo? It was the biggest brand on the web in 1999. They bought us, and I got some stock options. They appreciated, and I paid off my student loans, and I moved to Los Angeles to do stand-up comedy. So that was sort of my early career kind of progression. And then after a couple of years in LA, I was like, I thought when I moved to LA that they were going to be like, we've been waiting for you. Where have you been? The comedy world isn't complete without you in it. And of course, you get out there, you're like, oh, this is a life choice. This isn't hey, I'm going to pop out to LA and then in a few months I'm going to be
Yeah,
famous.
they'll roll out
No.
the red carpet for me.
No. A comedy is you say, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. And you go do it. And so I got engaged 2 years into my comedy stint in LA. And I thought to myself, I think it's probably a good idea for me to get a job, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but 100% of wives prefer employed husbands. to say nothing of fathers-in-law. So I got a job, and so about that time, I'm thinking maybe I should get a job, and then a buddy of mine from Yahoo called and said, "Hey, do you want to come join this little company called Facebook?" And it was about 250 employees, and I thought, "What the hell? Someday this company could be as big as MySpace." And I was right. It became much bigger. At the time, it was a fifth of the size of MySpace, but in
Far
a
out.
short period of time, it sailed way past MySpace, past Yahoo, and that's how I ended up at Facebook.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm sure the whole Facebook experience is well documented online, but did it, what you, that is such a, like in the history of the world, there's like three companies that have experienced, what those
Yeah.
250 employees experienced. Like, how does that feel? How do you look back on that time?
With appreciation, there's this whole thing about luck and fortune and meritocracy and all this stuff. And yes, I was very, very lucky to be in the right place at the right time with the right skills and the right relationships to end up where I ended up at Facebook. I was very lucky for that. But I had worked hard, and you know, I built those networks and those relationships. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of luck involved. There's also a lot of preparation. So I don't want to discount either of them. My time at Facebook, it was crazy because you're sort of aware that you're like, this is something special. This is something different. And yet you're still dealing with the day-to-day stresses of trying to do your job. And people look back and go, "Oh, Facebook, it's, in retrospect, well, clearly it was, a rocket ship, and everything was going to work out, and it was going to become $1 trillion market cap company." We didn't know that.
Yeah.
We knew it was different. And I make that joke about MySpace because that was literally the comp that we had back then. And I remember Mark Zuckerberg, who I've met a few times but wouldn't remember me. I remember him saying things like, "Look, we're not in competition with Yahoo and MySpace. We're building an app to connect humankind." He was thinking big from the beginning. And people that say that Zuck was only in it for the money or whatever don't remember that he turned down an offer to buy Facebook that would have made him $400 million when he was like 21 or 22 years old. Anybody that was in it for the money would have taken the money when they had the opportunity. He was on a different mission, and it was hard for those of us who were working for him to get our heads around. And I was 38, remember, and he was like 22 at the time. So I was an old man in this company. And so it's hard to open up your brain to see the possibilities that younger people see when you've been in the
Yeah.
business for, whatever, 15 years at that
Yeah, far out. That is just craziness.
point.
And I can imagine, like, I didn't even really know what to ask about that because it's just too, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I can
We can talk
imagine,
about Facebook all day long if you want to. I mean, it was
yeah,
a
no,
pretty
that's
wild
cool.
experience.
We're here to talk about happiness, and I'm sure like these conversations go in every direction at a million rates. But the night, like comedy in the 90s like particularly in LA, doesn't seem like it was a very nice place. I listened to, like Bobby Lee, who I think, like, I don't know if you ever cross paths with him, but like what he has to say about those times and, Joey Diaz and these kind of characters, it doesn't sound like, this must have been a totally different world to like the boardrooms of Facebook.
Well, what's interesting is I got this opportunity to be the house MC, the host of these two clubs in Orange County, California, which is 40 minutes to, depending on traffic, it could be an hour and a half southeast of Los Angeles. And so I had this little gig where I wasn't really in the comedy scene in LA. I was sort of protected, and I had this gig, this incredible gig that was so much better than I had any idea how good it was. And I was opening, I got this when I had maybe done 30 or 40 shows total. And I was bad. I didn't know I was bad because the shows I'd been doing were shows where people bring their friends, or I was doing shows at Yahoo sales conferences where I was a rock star because I was the guy who could make fun of the executives. So I thought I was really good. And then you go out and you have to make the general public laugh. And your like witty business corporate humor does not resonate with the general public. And so I was pretty bad, and I was flailing in front of top comedians like really Daniel Tosh, Dave Attell, Kevin Nealon, Colin Quinn, like big names, and I was bad. And so I had to get decent in a hurry, and I got
Yeah.
okay over time. But it's one of those things where it's like, people think, oh, I've done 100 stand-up shows, I've done a lot. No, 100 isn't a lot. 1,000 is getting there. 1,000 is where you start to really understand on an intuitive level how to do the job. I remember
Yeah.
Ralphie May, the late Ralphie May, telling me in the green room one time early in my stint there, he goes, you'll start to get the hang of it in about 8 years. And I was like, 8 years, dude. I was making $400,000 a year at Yahoo before I came here. 8 years is $3.2 million in foregone income without raises and inflation. And I was like, but just thinking in those terms is a recipe for not making it in comedy, because
Yeah.
you can't think about the opportunity cost. Comedy has to be the most important thing in your life. And that's why I walked away from it at the time.
Yeah. Far out. Yeah, no, I mean, makes sense. Makes sense. The You've given me a really nice bridge here to the next question. Well, to I don't know, the first question, the next question. Because the thing I love about comedians is that they are kind of the opposite of academics. So uh, I think academics do develop like a dark sense of humor, but academics will get accused of sitting in the ivory tower,
Yeah.
away from the world, just like thinking about whatever niche thing they think is interesting, whether it has any relevance to the world. And obviously not all academics are like that, whatever. But why I say that comedians seem to be the opposite is that they're on the coalface. They are traveling the country directly in front of the everyday person, and just, across red states, blue states, whatever. And I remember hearing like a lot of comedians that I listened to saying that, Trump getting elected wasn't a surprise to me because I could tell what jokes were making people laugh and what weren't. We were kind of, they're almost like outperforming the pollsters, which
Mm.
turns out wasn't very hard to do. But this idea of like having the finger on the pulse is really, really cool. And it's something that I think academics can learn a lot from. So that's why I was really keen to see your book coming out, talking about, being reasonably happy from a comedic. Obviously, you have a lot of your business perspective in there too. I'm really interested in like where does the reasonable part of happiness come from, and maybe even taking a step back, why happiness to begin with.
Well, let's do that. The second part first. So I started my podcast in 2019, and I left Facebook at 42 years old. I quit and walked away from work because having I was the kid that was always going to make money. I was the kid that was like, I'm going to go be successful. And then at Facebook, I made more money than I could ever imagine, and millions of dollars. And I got to a level where, hey, if I have this money, I can live a wonderful lifestyle on my own terms. I can send my kids to good schools. I can join a country club. I can travel well. I can live in a big house, maybe have a second house, that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, why do I need to work? Because work's just about a paycheck. Well, I was wrong. And after quitting, about 3 to 6 months after quitting, I found myself alone in my big house going like, why do I feel like a loser? Why don't I feel satisfied with this money that I always thought was going to complete me? Just like Jerry Maguire was completed, theoretically. There was no Jerry Maguire 2 for a reason, you'll remember. But and so I started reading everything I could about money and happiness. And there's a lot of it's a deep topic that's been researched at length, but most people don't think about this stuff, and I started to realize, oh, well, for one thing, belongingness is pretty important. It's the third level of Maslow's hierarchy, right above, not getting eaten by tigers and having enough to feed yourself. And you go, oh, belongingness is important. Well, I don't belong anywhere. I don't have a place to go where I can be useful and make a difference. That makes sense. I don't have an answer to the question, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a stereotypical American question when you meet somebody. But more to the point, we can forget that debate for a second, but that question really is, who are you? That's the question behind that. That's the intent behind that question. Like, what are you about? Where do you belong? And that's a weird thing. And then, so there's belongingness and feeling useful and not really having a purpose. And if you don't have a purpose, well, even if you have all the money in the world, what are you going to do every day? How are
Mm-hmm.
you going to justify, this life you're living? And so I learned pretty quickly that I needed something to do, and I was afraid to go, and I knew that comedy was still my dream, and I knew that, but I was scared because I had kind of failed once. I'd moved from Los Angeles back to Atlanta where I grew up. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know anybody in the scene, and I was afraid of failing again. But eventually I was like, well, I got to fail. I got to go fail, and I got to go. I realized that having enough money to choose to live the way I wanted to live and not living in line with my real dream, I felt like that was a dereliction of opportunity, and that I needed to get off my butt and go take a chance and risk failing. And so I got started back in comedy probably 11 years ago right now.
Wow. And so your plan was basically just like, I'm going to retire and just take every day as it like, what was the plan at the
Well,
time?
I didn't have a plan, and see, and that's one of the lessons that I came away with. It's like when you leave something, don't walk away from something. Go towards something. I mean, and I don't mean look, if you're in a toxic relationship, I'm
Sure,
not saying
sure.
don't get out of a toxic relationship. Okay, you're running towards safety in that case. Okay, you're not just running away from something. But I mean, like in life, with career stuff, you need to try to go toward, like, this is the goal, this is what I'm moving toward. And by the way, when I left Facebook, I left an enormous amount of both money and professional opportunity on the table. And so when you just walk away, you're paying a significant cost, an opportunity cost. And so, you know you owe it to yourself to have some other thing that you're trying to get after. And maybe I didn't have a plan. Maybe my plan was to try to get back into comedy, but I didn't have the guts to admit it at that point. But I did waste a lot of time not doing comedy. And I mean, I guess if I have a regret about leaving Facebook, it would be, one, I wouldn't be terrible to have captured some of that lost income and professional opportunity, but I didn't start doing comedy right away. And I wish I could have another year or two under my belt right now. But whatever. You live and you,
Yeah, you'll have it in a year from now, I guess.
yeah.
So,
I try
so
to
then
avoid regret. Regret avoidance is a big part of the way I think. And so, especially deathbed regrets, right? So like
interesting.
the thing I didn't want to feel on my deathbed, my theoretical deathbed, metaphorical deathbed, was, what if I had given comedy a full swing?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wanted the answer to that question. And I'm getting it, and it doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but I know that I've given it a full swing, that I've given it my all, and I won't have to regret not trying.
yeah. That's really nice. And so, well, I'm thinking about Ralphie May now. You've had your sort of your eight. You've had your 8 years. How are you? Are you sort of feeling? Where are you at in the comedy world? Are you feeling like you're getting there? I see that Chris Stefano follows you on Twitter, so I feel like that's a pretty good
Does he?
sign.
That's nice. That's nice. Chris, so I worked. So this is what happens when you start doing it. Like, you put yourself out there, and I started going to this club in Atlanta. I said to a friend of mine, he's like, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, "I'm interested in the intersection of business and comedy."
Yeah,
This was many years ago. And he goes, "Oh, well, you need to meet Marshall, the guy who owns the Laughing Skull Lounge, because we've been trying to produce comedy shows for different businesses. And, it sounds like what you're up to is in line with what we're up to." And when you finally have the courage to say, "This is what I'm trying to do," eventually you'll find other travelers, and then you'll be like, "Oh, this at least I have somebody this is the beginning of belongingness. This is the beginning of, okay, these are people that I can help, and they can help me." And I started doing comedy at the Laughing Skull Lounge, and, excuse me, sorry about that. And Chris Stefano was headlining, and I hosted for him one weekend 8 years ago. And I haven't been in touch with him, but yeah, you start meeting people, you start putting yourself in the mix. And I'm now, I don't know, 11 years in, and I understand what Ralphie was talking about. That 8 years in, you're better than you were 1 year in, and
yeah,
15 years in, you're better than you were 8 years in. And I look at these guys that have, like Chris. Chris has probably been doing comedy for 20 something years now, 25. He's not as old as the other guys like Louis and Attell and stuff like that, but I mean, he's been in the scene for a long time. And so I just moved to New York a year ago, and it's frustrating because I'm starting from scratch.
mm,
But if I'm 12 years in, or 11 full time years, and even 13 if you count those years in LA, I'm still half as seasoned as most of the people that are, established on the scene here.
Isn't that crazy to think about? Like you can be, yeah, there's this whole beauty of like mastery of the skill that is just so interesting and so fascinating. But so so then happiness. So where does the focus on? Obviously, like comedy, fun, laughing, happiness. Is it that kind of thing? What? Because I
No,
think you're
no.
talking about a deeper version than that, right?
Yeah, so I went off track when you asked me that question earlier, but the origin of the origin of the podcast was money and happiness, and then and Crazy Money was never a good name, which is what I called it at the beginning, because it made people. I get all these publicists reaching out to me saying, "I want you to interview my client who has a fail-safe way to make millions in real estate while you sleep," and I'm like, "No, that's not what this
Nice.
means." Ed Begley Jr., the actor Ed Begley Jr.'s publicist said, "Why would Ed do this? Like, this is off." And then I sent him a long explanation of what he goes, "Well, that's okay. That is very much in line with what Ed talks about,
Sure.
but that's not reflected in your name." He's like, "Maybe you should call it Crazy Money, Life Beyond the Dollar or something like that." But I changed it to Reasonably Happy because I think that captures kind of like the lessons of what I want to get at. And that one, expectations and understanding yourself are really a major factor in being happy.
Mhm.
And I think when you start reading the research, you realize that our brains are wired in ways that make us think some things will make us happy, but in the end don't. And we have to be conscious of that tribal wiring that we have and constantly be mindful of the ways that our brain is telling us to go, because the pursuit of money, the pursuit of power, the pursuit of fame, those things matter up to a point, but really what matters is being grateful for each day, accepting the imperfections in life, and not seeking jubilation as a panacea for boredom or for, somebody pointed out to me not long ago that the word disease is dis-ease. And I was like, oh my God, that's been right in front of me for my entire life. And I never even noticed it. But
Yeah.
it's that constant brain chatter that tells us we're not doing well enough, that we're not good enough. And that even when you make a gazillion dollars and you look in the mirror and you're like, why do I still feel like an idiot? Like a not enough idiot. That's your brain talking, trash to you, and you got to break out of that. And Reasonably Happy means, I in one of the essays in the book, I talk about the thesaurus of happiness, where there's all these different synonyms for happiness: jubilation, exhilaration, etc. And if you were to plot them from sort of like a spectrum from sexy to less sexy, the ones on the less sexy side are really the things we should be shooting for.
I-
Fulfillment, contentment, happy, like that manifestation of
Everyday
happiness.
stuff.
Yeah, as opposed to like, let's go chasing the cocaine high
Exuberance.
of
Yeah.
wealth. And like, I think our society, speaking for America, most people in America are broke. They have no money. They have less than $400. They couldn't fix a flat tire if they got one. And so they say, well, I want to be rich. It's like, no, you don't. You want to be not broke. That's what you want to be. You want to be financially autonomous. But that's
Yeah.
not that's not glorified. What's glorified is, this Kardashian,
Yeah. Oh man. I
royals
mean,
lifestyle that very, very few people are ever going to get. And the people that do chase it are generally not going to end up terribly
well,
content anyway.
yeah, and like you're saying, even if you do achieve it, it's not that fulfilling in the end anyway. But I love the idea of the Crazy Money podcast being like the pyramid scheme advertising podcast. I like that
Look, if I
idea.
could have figured that out, I'd probably still be doing it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could have been bigger than Facebook maybe, but yeah,
join
I'm
my
thinking
financial
of
newsletter list. For $79.99 a month, I'll help you beat the stock market.
absolutely just get 5 friends and away we go. But
There
I'm
you go.
thinking of you may have read some of his work, you may not. Kelsey O'Connor, he's an American economist, but he lives in Luxembourg and he might be of interest to you. He worked with Professor Easterlin, who's famous for the Easterlin paradox, which is about the relationship between national wealth and happiness. But Kelsey said something really interesting because the idea is that happiness predicts a country, wealth and GDP predicts a country's happiness up until a certain point, and then once you keep pouring more money in, and the happiness doesn't keep going up. And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, right? But this idea that the same is true for people, except for a different reason. And the different reason is that the more money you make, you could be happier, except you are now comparing yourself to a higher category of person, right? And
Absolutely.
so, and it's like, well, the message there is expect less, be more grateful with less, and be infinitely happy. Like, get over the poverty line,
Mm.
and like acceptance and humility is the way forward. And that is not a message that is a part of my field or society, as far as I can tell, at all. And I think it's incredible that we continue to idolize Kardashians for some reason.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's our reptile brain that looks at those things and responds to them. I mean, the things that grab our attention on social media are large breasts, or my attention anyway, large breasts, fires, fights, or crocodiles eating snakes, eating crocodiles. I mean, it's literally the reptile instinct in us that grabs our attention. And so I do think that's very true. And what one of the things I learned when I made some money, there's a line in Wall Street, the fantastic movie from 1987, with Charlie Sheen playing a banker, under the tutelage of Gordon Gekko, and he says, "I never realized how broke I was until I started making a little bit of money." And that's absolutely true. It's like as our horizon expands, you go, "Oh, wait a minute. I thought money was having a Mercedes and a big house. Now I realize money is having a jet that I don't have to go to the big airport. I go to the little airport." And if you start down that path, if you don't catch yourself, like we made a decision. I was like, I would rather pursue my craft, do what I want to
Uh-huh,
do,
uh-huh.
and fly premium economy than try to make another $1 or $2 million a year to sustain some like NetJets private jet lifestyle, because there's no end to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And so the reasonably happy, like I'm thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with Ed Diener as well. He's
I know of
recently,
Ed Diener.
yeah, he passed away a few years ago, but he's kind of the most loved, most respected academic, basically. And I think he has a paper. I haven't read it recently, but it basically is saying it is possible to be too happy. Like people who score 10 out of 10 on happiness scales are actually quite annoying.
They're
Something along,
delusional,
yeah,
probably.
something like that. And it's like I wondered whether there was a bit of that in the reasonably happy, because it's kind of
I
like just have a normal expectation of what life will be like.
Do you trust people that are always happy? I mean, and my friend, uh, I've got a friend who took me on a walk one day and said, I'm happy. I'm happy a lot. Like I'm a pretty happy person. I think you're like discounting that. And I trust him. I actually trust this guy, and he's a very positive person. And he and his wife are friends. But there's people that like is motivational people where you're like, dude, I can take you to 1,000x your potential, blah blah. You're like, I think those people are kind of full of it. And so what I'm just trying to say is like, look, it's okay to be not happy all the time. It's okay. And I'm programmed to be a little grumpy. I've been grumpy since I was a child. But I'm also very optimistic. I also am still very ambitious. I always have been. It's just we're all a complicated bag of emotions and attributes, and that's okay. The opportunity, and having been raised Catholic, I think about things instead of obligation. I think about things through the lens of opportunity. Our opportunity is to take a look at these things that we have and try to work on the parts of our original programming and channel them into living as positive a life as we can.
Uh-huh.
And it's okay to be imperfect. And it's okay to not always be happy, but we should strive for general happiness most of the time and to be the better part of ourselves when we can.
Yeah, look, well said. So, a lot of the research that I've been doing recently has been around sort of defining happiness and what do we mean by mental well-being and these kinds of ideas. And so it sounds like you're generally using happiness to talk about that more sort of eudaimonic fulfillment kind of
Totally.
side of things. Yeah, okay, cool.
Totally. I'm not a big
Like not a big positive emotion kind of emphasis.
Well, no, I think the positive emotion stuff is good and it's important. And again, our brains can be programmed. I mean, these are those reptile instincts that we have. We can, through things like meditation and mindfulness practices, we can steer ourselves back into a positive mindset. I play a lot of golf. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm not terribly well skilled, but the mental games that golfers play are proof that our brains will can be programmed to play better. If you think you're going to miss the putt, you're going to miss the putt.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that positive psychology and all that kind of stuff is hocus pocus. But I do think that you can take it a little too far.
Yeah. Yeah. And as someone squarely in that world, I would agree with what you're saying. So going to like this idea of, you are around I mean, are you basically doing comedy in New York, or are you sort of touring or anything like
I
that?
will be at I'm headlining the Denver Comedy Lounge October 17th and 18th. So I do get on the road some. I do a lot of shows at country clubs around the Southeast and starting to do some around the Northeast. I'm doing my best to break into the New York comedy scene. I had a great show at
Okay.
the West Side Comedy Club the other night. It's just, there's a massive supply and demand issue,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's a reputation building. It's necessary to build your reputation in the
Mhm.
scene. The
Mhm.
challenge is just breaking in to get
Mhm.
the stage time for people to even see you. The other night there was a very well established comedian who followed me afterwards. He was like, "Who are you? Where'd you come from?" And that felt very good. You just need to do that over and over and over
Yeah.
again, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Can we ask who that person was?
That was Brian Scott McFadden, who's not a
Okay.
well-known comedian, but he is incredibly talented. He's one of these guys, New York, these guys have been doing comedy in New York for 30 years
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like you're watching a dancer who's been dancing since they were 12.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like, how does this person get this good to where it just appears effortless?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's what is it, unconscious competence at a whole new level where you're like, this only comes from repetition over decades. And so,
Yeah.
and I'm not comparing myself to him, but it was really good to have a good set in front of somebody. You go like, this dude knows the difference between good and bad comedy.
I was going to say, and it sounds, yeah, obviously I'm a million miles away, but it sounds like that kind of feedback goes a long way, even in the scene itself. Like having these
One would hope
established.
so.
Yeah.
One would
Yeah.
hope
That's cool.
so. So that you can say, hey man, look, will you do me one favor? Will you just
Yeah.
tell one club booker that I'm good,
Yeah.
you know? And so and hopefully over time that gets me to where I'm working a lot, because if you're not working a lot, if you're not getting up on stage, you're not getting better.
Hmm.
You're treading water at best. And so
Hmm.
that's really what I'm just trying to
Yeah.
work and get better.
Well,
Fame and fortune is somewhere down the road, if at all, but I want to get better. And again, the motivation is, what would happen if I gave it my all?
yeah, this is really cool, and I'll definitely be watching in the future. But in terms of, I guess I asked the question about sort of traveling around because I want to ask this question of, this idea of comedians having their finger on the
Mm.
pulse. I think we are saying lots of the same things in terms of, we do like lots of well-being skills training. I think we sometimes have our head in the books too much. Basically, as academics, we don't speak, just normal language. I think that you're synthesizing textbooks and putting them into single sentences very nicely. I'm kind of doing the opposite and just saying too much that's not as clear as you're speaking. So, what are the sorts of things you're seeing in terms of happiness in the culture as you on your travels?
I don't want to get too political. It's, things are very, very politically charged right now in the United States. But it has become, and I have put some things on social media where I learned very quickly that I'm seeing a completely different set of videos and news items than everybody else is. And this isn't just the news bubble that we're in. This is the entertainment that presents itself to us.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I put up something that was sort of mocking the over sexualization of young and old women on Instagram that my feed was sending me. Now I know what that means. People who are listening, that says that means you're a creep who wants to see
Looks
all
at it.
that
Yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and okay, so that's good to be aware of, and to say like, no, give me less of this, Instagram. And so I put something up that sort of mocked that, and in so doing, I realized that other people don't understand the context of what I was putting out, and it made me look very insensitive. And I don't want to be insensitive. I'm willing to take a risk and offend a couple of people, but when my friends start telling me this is kind of not good, you go, okay, well they can't possibly understand the context of this joke because they don't see the same things that I see. So I think the one thing I try to be aware of, and hopefully everybody else is really aware of, and this takes a lot of effort to do it, is that everybody else is seeing a whole different version of reality
Yeah.
than we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't attest, these comedians, I think those are good points. When you go to Oklahoma or Arkansas or Ohio or, the Midwest, or these states that, where real people live, but whose voices aren't amplified on social media or in newspapers or in academic journals or things like that, we're not taking their opinions into consideration. Over 50% of the country voted, or 50% of the voters voted for our current president. Okay, that's a non-trivial number of people.
Mhm.
So for academic types to sort of say, well, 50% of the country is racist, that's not intellectually rigorous to say that. And the opposite is also true. Zoran Mamdani is, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, but
Yeah, he's like just elected in New York, right?
well, he won the primary, and generally
Okay.
he won the Democratic primary, and generally the person who wins the Democratic primary wins the mayoral office. And so, people on the other side are like, this guy's a lunatic. And it's like, okay, yes, but what's resonating? Why do people respond to what he has to say? And look at that and understand what's going on there, because you're not seeing the same thing in social media that they're seeing.
Mm.
And we have to really force ourselves to understand that, even if empathy is self-serving, we need to understand why people are resonating with the messages of those very different and respective politicians.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really nice. And I do think that kind of that atomization, that idea that like we are all just becoming individuals literally floating in space, disconnected from, like my reality is my reality. Husbands and wives are turned against each other. Like down political lines, it's like you obviously 9 times out of 10, you got married, you probably agreed on a bunch of stuff. And now you have these like, she's red, I'm blue, or vice versa. Like, how has this happened? You've been fed this algorithm that's just shown you this totally different reality. So I'm with you. I don't know. Am
And
I overplaying it?
no, and these are strong determinants of happiness today. And I think politics is something that's really making us less happy and less connected
Mhm.
and more afraid of our fellow human being. All the identity stuff of the last 10 years, I don't remember being nearly as conscious of another person's gender or race
Yeah,
10
yeah.
years ago. Now I see somebody, I'm like, that's a black woman, she probably doesn't like me. Why? That's a messed up thing to think. That's a horrible thing to think. But that's what the conversation has led us to.
Mhm.
And it's dangerous. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I really enjoyed looking and learning more about you and seeing the stuff that you put out because it does seem very, very balanced. Like I think that's a very hard thing to do. It seems to
You don't get a lot of points for nuance these days,
no,
man.
no,
And so I had a Republican strategist who I went to college with on my show a few weeks ago, and a few weeks before that, I had a progressive news commentator on, and you just get you just get 50% of the people are mad at you no matter what you say. And it
purely
seems
for
like if
having
you
them on
try
as
to
a
and if
guest.
you and if you try to put something balanced up, then 85% of the people get mad at you. So you're like,
Both
you
sides.
can't win. So I think like media capture is a real thing. All this stuff. I don't know if you've seen the follow the news items in the States where Jimmy Kimmel, the ABC late
Yeah,
night
yeah,
television
yeah,
host,
yeah.
these guys, they're same with Stephen Colbert on CBS. And if you look at what happens is these news networks, they say we are either conservative or
Yeah.
liberal,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
have to pick one or the other, or you can't aggregate a critical mass of audience, because nobody wants to hear, the balanced perspective. Nobody, they only, we all want to hear these bias confirming
No.
stories
Yeah.
that
And
make us feel like our brains literally release brain chemicals making us feel
yeah.
better.
And you've hit the nail on the head, because this idea of like cancel, the right has been so against cancel culture, so against cancel culture, and now they're celebrating Jimmy Kimmel losing his job for something that like I didn't even think was that inflammatory or insensitive. Like
I didn't.
forgetting what he said, just
He said
even
he
let's
was.
not even comment on what he said.
I think
The
what he
point,
said was irresponsible. I think what he said was
like,
irresponsible. But I don't like the whole premise of conservative patriotic Americans is that we are allowed to have free markets and free individual expression, and up your arse, King George, for trying to tell us how we're supposed to live and taxing us. Is like, no, the First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason.
yeah,
It without it, we don't exist. And yet here's the conservative, if you want to call it that. I don't think they're conservatives at all. But here's the Republican Party that supposedly are conservatives celebrating, somebody who's deplatformed. Isn't that everything that they preached against during woke culture?
and yes, and that's I guess where I'm trying to go is like this again, this like atomization of you're being fed a narrative that you're just kind of falling for. There was like this wake up call. I've just heard a few sort of more of the conservative types saying this morning, like, guys, wake up. This is what we hated. And now if you're celebrating it, you're captured. Like,
But this is the thing about power, man. This is the human tendency, and that revolutions theoretically start from a magnanimous, it'd be helpful if I could pronounce it, from a good intention to help the little person. But what happens when those revolutionaries get into power? They just become greedy, powerful people who prioritize their well-being, their wealth over everybody else's. It happens again and again and again. And so, this whole censoring of the media goes way back to other presidents as well. This isn't the first. And it's very hard to resist the temptation to use power to advance your agenda.
yeah, yeah. And again, I'm thinking of another academic, an American colleague of mine. His name's Todd Kashdan. He's a professor
I know who he
in
is.
oh yeah. So he's got a
Yeah.
book called The Art of Insubordination, and one of the chapters is literally that. Like, if you win with your rebellion, win well. Don't the boot that was stomping on you, don't become that boot.
I guess it's hard not to. I guess it's
Yeah,
really,
probably is.
it's like, how do you not, I guess to retain power, you have to quash your enemies however you see them. I don't know. I think we're better than that.
Yeah. No, this is really cool. So I had one last question for you, basically, Paul, and it is kind of a random question. So it's just I was just thinking of like at the intersection of
I'm
like,
6'2", and yes, my hair is natural.
okay, I believe you. Haven't been to you considering Turkey or anything, or isn't that a thing that people do?
I mean, if I could snap my fingers and have my hair regrown, sure, I would love to, but I'm not doing that. I'm not
Kind of
doing
fits
that.
with the reasonably happy thing.
That
I
would be,
I
that
kind of
is
I like
off
it.
brand for me on many
Yeah.
levels.
Okay. Very cool. So I flicked through the book. I saw lots of. I really liked it. I liked the structure
Thank
of
you.
it being bits and pieces. If I've interpreted it the right way, bits and pieces you've written together that sort of become a compilation of a nice narrative. And you touched on themes of sort of family, parenting, obviously a lot on finance, and I was wondering, like, one thing that I'm really seeing make a big difference, I think, on happiness, and this is like not an academic opinion at all. This choice that people are making between material comfort and starting a family, and maybe it's not a choice, right? So maybe I'm even being unfair. Like for a lot of people, they're saying we financially could not afford to start a family, and so we don't. And I think there's a famous sociological study of the US where there's like, baby stores, like as in, like we buy prams and nappies and stuff going down, and like pet grooming stores are going up. Like they're basically replacing them. And so, I think I'm pretty sure that's a real thing.
That would be
What
that's oh my God, that is, if that's true, that would explain a lot.
I am going to go out on a limb and say that is 100% true, although I just said I don't know. So I'll find it for you and I'll send it to you. So I'm wondering, like, this is why it's a random question, right? But it's just one thing that, a lot of my friends are sort of family starting age,
Yep.
and people are making different choices here, right? And so I'm not disparaging the choice, but I do think it's a tragedy if the economic climate prevents someone from starting the family that they did want. And so I'm wondering, you're kind of at this intersection of family. I was actually pretty pleased to see that your kids like soccer as well. That was also very nice. Or football.
Go Fulham. Go Fulham.
Oh, Fulham. Okay, there you go. Where does this land? Do you have an opinion on this? I know this is totally left of center.
This is a, I'd love to have this conversation over pints with you, because I think there's a lot going on here. I didn't get married till I was 38. And I personally felt like I wanted to be one, timing has a lot to do with it. And you have to be ready to be married and be in a relationship that you want to, endure for decades when you're ready to be married. And that didn't happen to me until I was 38. So I didn't have kids till I was 40, and another one I was 42. All right. I mean, I think that's mostly healthy, although men have that luxury and women don't have it quite as much. So there's that. Obviously, women want careers. They have every right to want a career, and there's some tension between career progression and motherhood.
For sure.
It just is what it is. So yeah, birth rates are going down, and I think that's proven across cultures, is that as affluence increases, birth rates go down. There's major economic and sociological impacts that leads to. But I think I think the biggest thing that comes to mind when we talk about this is wants versus needs, and that people believe the minimum level of materialism in the American home today is astounding. Like, if you don't have an iPhone, you're in poverty. Like, if you don't have, the amount of luxuries that we consider to be normal is absurd. And so in the way I was raised, and my parents, and this is part of what informs what I do. My parents were Depression era people. They were the most frugal people in the world. They washed and reused tinfoil and sandwich bags. My dad would turn off the water midway through his shower while he soaped up, and then would turn it back on to rinse off. Like, these were very frugal people. We didn't take fancy vacations. We had old cars and old furniture, and my parents were like, that's not important. What's important is paying for this Catholic education that they paid for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where their values were. And my father never borrowed any money except to buy a home. And I remember talking to him about, he said people who borrow money to go to Disneyland are fools. But we consider a trip to Disney World or Disneyland to be a right, not a privilege in middle America. And it's like, well, why do we think that? Why do you have to have every streaming service that you're paying for every month that bleeds you dry, even though you've forgotten that you're still paying for them? Like, we have a distorted understanding of what minimally accepted living standards are. I'm
Yeah.
not saying there's
Yeah.
not legitimately poor people in this country that are poor because of the structure of the job market and some historical inequities that are legitimate. I just mean, for people who have a college education and good jobs, saying that they don't have the money to raise a kid, probably are focusing on the wrong things. Owning a dog, I mean, and my wife and I fight about this. Unfortunately, for whatever it's worth, we don't have to worry about an extra couple $100 a month to own dogs. But that's a lot of money. Our dog never went to the groomer. Our dog ate Gravy Train, which was, this organic dog food is just out of control. It's like, your dog doesn't need that. But if that's more important than raising a kid, then maybe you shouldn't have a kid.
Yeah. 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 I think, yeah, look, I agree with you. I was, that was a great answer. I thought you'd have a good, an interesting opinion on that. And I completely agree. This is my biggest mission. Like as a parent, I've got 3 kids, and my biggest thing is like humility. I said it before, but humility is the thing that I absolutely want to pass on to my kids. And I'm not very humble. I'll be out there and say it, but it's just in me that, like, my grandparents, my wife's parents came from Europe with literally, there's the classic like Ellis Island kind of story. Came here with nothing, with like two, a shoe and like a suitcase. And, my parents like struggled through that, say. I at least like saw it to some degree. Like as the generations go on, it kind of like it softens, right? So my parents kind of experienced it. I at least saw it and saw, had a relationship with my grandparents that, it kind of rubs off. But for my kids, like they're like Nonna's got a Porsche, like my, their great grandmother's like she's doing really well now, 50 years later.
Sure.
That they don't understand. Like I know that I don't understand it, right? But at
Yeah.
least I understand it more than they will. And so how does this message pass on?
Well, there's I don't know if you read Rob Henderson, who he's somebody worth reading. He and I interviewed him on my podcast not too long ago, but excuse me, he wrote a book called Troubled. He was in something like 10 foster homes by the time he was 8 years old. Abuse, hunger, just loneliness, and feeling not loved as a child. He eventually developed drug and alcoholism, but then went into the military service, I believe the Army, might have been the Air Force, and found himself, got sober, got clean, eventually went to Cambridge and earned his PhD and wrote this book about his story. And he's talking a lot recently about downward mobility in the United States. And that one of the challenges we have now is we have all these college kids that were told they were very, very special from an early age, and they haven't known want. They've had everything they've ever needed and more, and they haven't really had to work that hard to get through the early stages of your career. Then they get into adulthood and they're like, well, why am I not succeeding? And that's what I worry about for my kids. Not that they're going to be bad people, but that they're just not going to have the same kind of hunger that I had to establish myself, earn my way. And again, I want to be aware. I want to be self-aware. I had all the advantages. I had great parents. They
Sure.
put me through college. They got me through college with no debt. And so when I went to business school, that was on me. But like I had 99% of the advantages that any kid should want or be grateful for. But my kids have even more than I did. And they live a very high standard to a very high standard of living. And I worry that, they'll be frustrated if they can't achieve the same thing. And by the way, not being in the 1% isn't a tragedy. It's just, but it does lead to dissatisfaction because of the whole expectations versus outcomes thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so you can be in the 97% and feel like a failure. And that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. And can, if you don't mind me asking, have you got any strategies of what it is you're trying?
Yes, occasionally in the wintertime, I lock them out of the house and I say, you have to sleep outside tonight. No, we're trying to, we try to lead by example. And when we try to treat everybody we encounter in our lives with respect. And, I want them to see that, we live our values we try to live our values of humility, and we work on things that we think are worth working on, and that we're grateful for what we have, and we don't worship money, or we don't worship other people who have more than us, and we respect people who have less than us. And we expect our kids to do their homework, and we're trying to they're now middle teenagers, and we're trying to say, okay, well, what kind of work are you going to do? What kind of interaction with the real world are you going to do? What kind of job are you going to get, in addition to doing the very nice things that we get to do, family travel and things like that. So
Okay.
I don't know. In the end, it's going to be up to them. At a certain point, you can't want it for your kids. Your kids have to want it for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And I guess if they come to you and say, listen, I've got, do I chase the money? Do I chase the fulfillment? What's the answer going to be? Or is it both?
I You have to be able to pay your rent. And if you want it bad enough, you'll figure that out. because I doing comedy, I've had a lot of exposure to younger adults, in their 20s and 30s, and I'm like their dad's age, and their first thing they say to me is like, well, you're rich. I'm like, I'm 30 years older than you are. I've had 30 years to pay off my debt and put money in the bank. So think about that. It didn't look, I'm very lucky, but it didn't happen by accident.
Mhm.
Okay. So you got to earn it. And by the way, my first 3 years out of business school, I had a roommate. I took the subway. I rarely took cabs. I was working 80 hours a week plus a lot of the time because I wanted it. You have to want it. And if you don't want it, that's fine, but don't expect to get the rewards if you don't put in the time. And look, if you spend your money on Dragon Ball Z tattoos, you're not going to have money left to take that trip you want. It's like you don't get both. If you have $1,000, you don't get both the tattoo
$2,000
and
worth, yeah.
and Coachella tickets. You don't get to have both.
Yeah, I saw you post about that thing, that what percentage of Coachella attendees had like put it on
It's insane.
whatever that thing's called, like on credit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's insane. And look, the
Yeah.
industry exists, and it traps people into spending money they don't have and then paying interest on the money they borrowed. And it's generally not positive, and you have to be stronger than the marketing of a very well-funded industry.
All right. Well, yeah, that was awesome. I'm really passionate about well-being science generally. Sounds like lots of the stuff you've been reading, like, I think most of the sort of academic community want it to be useful. And so if you're sort of a consumer of this research, like, what do you want out of this field? What is it? Where do you think there are gaps? What do you think are things that you kind of go like, I wish they'd be actually answering this question. What would that look like?
Well, I mean, if you look at, I read a lot of academic stuff, and I read a lot of sort of where academic stuff kind of gets into pop, self-help, I guess you would say. I think the difference between the impact of something like Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money and some academic book that presented the same theories is that he tells stories.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that, first of all, I want to say to your academic colleagues, thank you for doing your work. Keep doing your work, and keep and have courage to tackle topics that might be politically unpopular on your campus. For example, oh my gosh, Professor Kearney, Melissa Kearney, who was at University of Maryland, wrote a book called Two-Parent Privilege. There couldn't be anything more important to discuss than the
Yeah.
importance of
Yeah.
family structure in determining the most economically disadvantaged, racially and economically disadvantaged people than a two-parent family. But she was cast out because she was seen as being anti whatever, judgmental,
Yeah.
conservative,
Yeah.
Republican.
Yeah.
So have
Yeah.
this courage to pursue topics that are important but not popular, and then tell stories. Most academic stuff is written for other academics, and it includes jargon and lots of Greek letters. And yes, that's important to get published, I guess, but like, if you want it to have an impact beyond the academy, tell stories, make it relatable to the average person, and your research will have much more impact. um, and you'll have the opportunity to do a lot more cool things because funding will find you.
That is awesome. What a way to wrap it up, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. This has been so fascinating. And so, where can people find you?
Words.paulollinger.com. And I got to change that to make it easier to remember, but I'm going to change it to just my initials, but words.paulollinger.com. Paul Ollinger is Paulollinger. If you'd like, you can put a link to it in the show notes, but
I
that's my
will. Yeah.
Substack page. And that's kind of my hub online. It's where I do my writing. And, from there you can get in touch with me, and I'd love to learn more about what's going on in Australia.
Very cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.